Ted Bundy is one of America's most notorious serial killers, a man whose outward charm and normal appearance hid a violent and disturbing reality. His story begins on November 24, 1946, when he was born in Burlington, Vermont. But even from birth, his life was tangled in secrecy. For the first years of his life, Bundy believed his grandparents were his parents, and that his mother, Louise, was his older sister. This family deception, created to protect him from the stigma of illegitimacy, left deep emotional confusion that many psychologists believe shaped his future personality. Bundy grew up in Tacoma, Washington, where he appeared shy, quiet, and intelligent. But even as a child, relatives recalled eerie moments. Bundy would watch people silently, place objects under blankets to scare others, and show an early fascination with knives and dark topics. Still, to most who knew him, he blended in as a normal boy who struggled socially but showed academic promise. As a young adult, Bundy studied psychology at the University of Washington. Ironically, he understood human behavior well enough to use it against others. He even worked at a suicide hotline crisis center. Co-workers described him as calm, empathetic, and reassuring, a chilling contrast to the man he would later become. A crime author who worked beside him, Ann Rule, said the idea of Bundy being a killer was unimaginable at the time. Bundy wanted stability, respect, and a sense of belonging. He dated several women, but one woman in particular profoundly shaped him. She was elegant, wealthy, and everything Bundy wanted to be. When she eventually ended the relationship, due to his immaturity and lack of direction, Bundy felt rejected and humiliated. After their breakup, investigators believe his violent behavior escalated sharply. Many of his later victims resembled her, young, attractive women with long brown hair, parted in the middle. In the early 1970s, young women across Washington and Oregon began disappearing. At first, the cases seemed unrelated. A missing student here, a vanishing coworker there. But detectives eventually noticed disturbing patterns. Most victims were college-aged women, all resembling one another, and many were last seen speaking to a polite man who appeared injured and introduced himself simply as Ted. Bundy often used a fake arm cast or crutches to appear helpless. He would approach women in public places, ask for help carrying books or loading items into his car, and then overpower them once they got close. He kidnapped and murdered his victims in secluded areas and sometimes returned to the crime scenes, a detail that still disturbs investigators today. One of the boldest attacks happened at Lake Sammamish State Park in 1974. In broad daylight, Bundy approached multiple women, all while wearing a sling and speaking politely. Two women disappeared that same day. Witnesses remembered his name and his distinctive Volkswagen Beetle, giving police their first major lead. Soon after, friends, co-workers, and even Bundy's own girlfriend contacted police to report him as a possible suspect. His name was submitted multiple times, but investigators dismissed him because he didn't fit their mental picture of a killer. He was educated, kind-seeming, politically active, and had no criminal record. Bundy later moved to Utah for law school, but his crimes continued. His downfall began on August 16, 1975, when a police officer stopped his Volkswagen. Inside, the officer found handcuffs, rope, masks, and suspicious tools. Bundy was arrested, and soon he was linked to the attempted kidnapping of Carol Duranch, one of the few women who managed to escape. In 1976, Bundy was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to prison. But his story was far from over. In 1977, Bundy executed two remarkable escapes. During a court hearing in Colorado, he jumped out of a second-story window and fled into the mountains, surviving for 6 days. After being recaptured, he starved himself, slipped through a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell, and walked right out of the building, disguised as a visitor. By the time police realized he was gone, Bundy was already on a bus headed out of state. He eventually fled to Florida, where he committed some of his most brutal crimes. In January 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University and viciously attacked 4 women, killing 2. Just weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, the youngest of his known victims. Bundy was finally arrested again in February 1978. This time, the law wouldn't let him go. His trials in Florida became a national phenomenon. Cameras filled the courtroom. Reporters documented his every move. Bundy loved the attention. At times, he represented himself, cross-examining witnesses and trying to present himself as intelligent and charming. He even proposed to a woman in the courtroom, exploiting a Florida law that recognized such proposals during court proceedings as legal marriages. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bundy was convicted for the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. He later received a second death sentence for the murder of Kimberly Leach. While on death row, Bundy spent years appealing his convictions, giving interviews, and manipulating anyone he could. As his execution date approached, he began confessing to many of his murders, not out of guilt, but to prolong his life. He eventually admitted to 30 homicides, though investigators believe the true number could be far higher. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison, crowds celebrated, holding signs and cheering as the news broke. Bundy's final words were simple: "Give my love to my family and friends." Today, Ted Bundy remains one of the most analyzed criminals in history. His case reshaped how police departments share information across states, improved forensic methods, and changed how investigators track serial offenders. But the most important part of this story is not Bundy himself. It is the victims, whose names deserve to be remembered far more than the man who took their lives. Finally, here are several factual but lesser-known details that show just how deceptive Bundy truly was. He once worked at a suicide hotline and was praised for saving lives. He studied psychology and understood how to manipulate almost anyone he met. He escaped custody twice, in ways that seemed impossible, and he maintained relationships with women who believed in his innocence, long after overwhelming evidence proved otherwise. Ted Bundy's story is chilling, not because of the sensational headlines, but because it reveals how evil can hide behind a friendly smile, a polite personality, and an ordinary face. His life reminds us that danger is not always obvious, and that the victims of his crimes should remain at the center of every retelling of this tragic history.